Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Forbidden Dinner Table. I am Alex.
And I'm Zach.
And we have another great discussion in store for everybody today. This is a topic that we've wanted to cover for a little while. We didn't really know when the appropriate time was. And now with all the crazy stuff going on in Canada, we thought this would be a good time to talk about protesting. But before we do that, Zach, I'm going to send it to you. I believe we have a couple callbacks.
Yes, I've got two sort of callback topics I want to dive into a little bit. One is some feedback that I've received about some of our episodes, most recent episodes, really around the non-fungible hot takes one with our guest Nathan McCourt. Got some feedback that as much as, and I believe we called this out in episode 0, of like wanting to lay some ground rules that we unpack topics and don't, what I sort of internally call play inside baseball, where we just kind of run our speed and use our language. I got a lot of feedback from that episode that we moved really quickly and didn't define terms. Like some people told me, they were like, I listened to it, but I got super lost. I didn't understand what an NFT was. I didn't really know what blockchain was. And just sort of like, I think you and I, and especially when we bring in people like Nathan who really have a pulse on some of this stuff, forget that the rest of the world isn't paying as close attention to some of these technological advances or moves in those sort of spaces. So I just want to kind of call that out. There was kind of feedback.
I remember thinking that in the episode, but then also kind of thinking that we didn't take a moment up front to define it, which we should have. But throughout the episode, we sort of like piecemeal definitions together, but I understand that can be hard to listen to as well. Yeah.
This reminds me a little bit of a game or segment from a podcast that I liked and used to listen to a lot called, the podcast is The Indicator on NPR. It's an economics podcast, and they do this sort of game or kind of bit where they ask to define a really advanced economic concept, and they usually have like a guest on or an economist who's explaining it. And anytime that economist uses a word that's a little jargony, they hit what's called the jargon bell. And they have to stop the definition and define the word that they just said in the definition. I don't think we need to actually bring out a jargon bell, but I want to take the spirit of that.
Yeah, for sure. I like that.
It's kind of funny too because like in an example, they have like they're giving a definition, use a jargony like word, they hit the jargon bell, and then as they're explaining the word for the definition, they use another jargon. So they're like triple nested trying to explain these advanced economic concepts with more layman's terms or kind of common language. But I really like the spirit of that, of like, let's try to remember that you and I may be sort of absorbed in these topics and forget that we need to break it down a little bit more.
So there are inception layers to the jargon bell.
There are.
But yes. We should call each other out and just say like, ooh, I'm going to hit the jargon bell on that. If you could just take a second and watch each other as we kind of do this, because like you said, it's really easy to just get on a roll and then forget about circling back and defining terms. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the first thing I wanted to call out. Appreciate the feedback from people that provided that. If you have any feedback at all, too, please do not hesitate to email us at forbiddendinnertable@gmail.com.
Yes.
And the second callback that I want to just kind of reference a little bit, and I want to do the jargon bell comment first before I go into this one, because I'm going to have to define some terms here. But when I was re-listening to the technology episode with Nathan, the non-fungible hot takes, we talked a lot about advertising and advertising in the meta space and how like advertising exists on the internet. And I had this sort of like aha moment, that moment of like something that you know is true and it's sort of is in your brain, but when you define it or turn it a little bit from a perspective standpoint, you get like a new insight on it, which is the idea that advertising is a Nash equilibrium. And what I mean by that, super economic terms, let me break that down. A Nash equilibrium is an outcome where, kind of in like a game when you're competing with somebody, and if you think really in like a fixed finite game, let's make it super easy, where there's sort of the two choices for the opponent to make and two choices for you to make. A Nash equilibrium is an outcome that no matter what your opponent does, you always play the same strategy. The most common example is the prisoner's dilemma. If you've ever heard of that, where the story goes that, we've got person A and person B, and they're taken by the police and they're put in separate rooms and they're being charged with a crime. And person A can either remain quiet or rat the partner out. Person B can remain quiet or rat their partner out. Person B would rat person A out. And the way the sort of payoffs work is if they're both quiet or they both don't rat on each other, they'll get 3 years of prison. If one rats on the other one and the other one stays quiet, you'll only get 1 year, but the person who doesn't speak gets 10 years. If they both rat on each other, they both get 10 years. So in that scenario, it's advantageous to always rat your partner out, because either you'll get the lower sentence or the same sentence as sort of that's gonna happen. So what I mean now, backing up a little bit to advertising is a Nash Equilibrium. Let's take an example like Apple versus Samsung, right? Advertising in the phone space. So it's always advantageous to advertise, because if your partner doesn't advertise, you will dominate the market in the advertisement space. And if your partner does advertise, you need to compete to advertise to stay on par with them. So when I was thinking about like the reason advertising exists all over is because when you break it down in this more sort of mathematical concept, it's the best, most advantageous strategy to play as a company.
I think about that a lot with Coke and Pepsi. Like they're both those companies are at the point where they don't really need to advertise anymore, but yet they're locked in doing it forever because they can never stop.
Right.
Because if one stops, the other wouldn't, or whatever. I actually weirdly was thinking about what is sort of, as you just coined said, the prisoner's dilemma. What's that game? It's like a party game on Xbox, Jackbox, and they have a game in there that's made up of smaller games. And one of the smaller games is there's a pool of money in the room.
Yes.
And everybody can either choose to not take the money or take the money. And if everybody chooses not to take the money, it's split amongst everybody. If one person chooses to take it, they'll get it. But if two people choose to take it or more than one, nobody gets it.
That's prisoner's dilemma right there.
And it's funny because the reason I was thinking about it was actually in the context of like geopolitical terms or like nuclear war type of a thing of like that's between, especially if you just take like the US, China, Russia, we're basically all just playing that game. Yep. Hoping nobody else does the thing.
Yeah, and that's actually game theory exploded as a field during the Cold War as part of people trying to understand what the best strategy is against Russia, or the USSR at the time. But
luckily,
so that's
no one's opted to make the move in that one, but we're all just kind of looking at each other being like, we've agreed not to take it, right? And
What I think is super interesting, and I studied this in school because it's a huge part of economics, because the prisoner's dilemma, that same concept of like, if you cooperate, if everybody cooperates, it's better, but everyone's incentivized to cheat. That shows up over and over and over again in the economic space or the business space. Even when you just think about like, I think it's OPEC, the oil collaborators, when they came together and they're like, we're only going to produce so much. Nobody produce a little bit more. You're all incentivized to produce a little bit more because everyone else is holding back supply, and so it's
what
raising,
everyone else is doing.
It's raising the price, so you want to put a few more barrels out in the market, and then naturally that brings it down to the actual economic level. But what changes the prisoner's dilemma game is how long you play it for and who you're playing it with. So like if you took a stranger and put me into that, sort of have to rat on them for a crime case, I'm going to rat on them. But if you take me and you, Alex, I have a relationship with you, your family, we have a future together as well. That's going to change the dynamic of like, we'll both cooperate because we have this emotional tie.
There's a level of trust that you might not do it, or because we both kind of know what the right thing is. But you brought up a point that I've never thought about, and then we'll circle all the way back to your callback because we've kind of gone down a different road. But I've never thought about it as you either win or don't lose. And so it's kind of interesting that, you should always go for the win, because worst case scenario, you and the other person end up the same. Nobody really loses, which is kind of, I guess I've just never thought about it like that before. So,
I mean, it's even a cleaner, better example in with the one that you talked about, where if everybody votes to share the money, right, in the Jackbox game, you want to steal it because then you get it all.
Yeah,
it's a better outcome.
Or nobody gets anything, which means like, well, I didn't lose. We all ended up the same. now if
Right.
you play that game with me, you're going to know what I do every time.
Yeah. Fun fact, it's called Nash Equilibrium. It's named after John Nash, which people are like, I have no idea who that is. But if you say, yes, you may, he's the main person in the movie A Beautiful Mind. That's John Nash.
I was hoping it would be Steve Nash.
Steve Nash. Get real late in the game. But yeah, John Nash is where that's from. He was one of the fathers of game theory as a field.
Okay.
So that, as I was listening to and thinking about advertising in the metaverse and like so much advertising, we were talking about taking breaks from advertising potentially as that park space on the internet.
Yep.
I kind of was just like, why is there so much advertising? And then boom, it hit me. It's mathematically or sort of strategically the best strategy for companies.
You have another sub-bullet point here. Do you want to hit that as well? Because I don't know what it is.
Yeah. The sub-bullet point, just for the listeners, is so a little bit of behind the curtain here. Alex and I don't go real deep into what we're talking about, but we put bullet points on a shared doc. And
well, we still like to keep the other a little bit surprised. We don't want to, show everything, all the cards, because we do want authentic discussion and authentic reactions. So you have something written here. I don't know what it means, but please enlighten us.
Yeah. So my sub bullet point, this is going to seem so silly now. I was going to skip over it, but you brought it up. But sub bullet point is fruit are the ways that trees asexually reproduce. And the why I had this as a sub bullet point is like, it's sort of that thing that it's a fact in your brain, but when people point it out, you're like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. It's another example of like, that's how I thought about advertising. Of like, I've always known that like Pepsi and Coca-Cola are locked in this battle. But then when somebody sort of points in a different way, you're like, oh yeah, I do know this. It's the same as like every time I bite into a pear, I'm just thinking that it's delicious food. And somebody's be like, you're eating like the way that the tree reproduces. And you're like, yeah, I guess I do know that.
I see. Okay.
That's all I got for callbacks.
Lovely. Okay. Well, then we are going to move on to
one timely at least that I've got in my camp.
Oh, let's start with that then, so we're going to move into protesting, which is kind of just a big ball that I've been walking around, and I don't know which angle to approach it from. So hit us with your timely, and then I'm going to, when the music stops, I'm going to charge in. So we'll see where that is.
Sounds good. This one is just a short one. So it's an article that came out today, February 15th, 2022. This is from NPR.org. The headline is, an Arizona priest used one wrong word in baptisms for decades. They're all invalid. So I'm going to just read some parts of this. I'm going to skip kind of some sections, but I'll give you the meat of this episode, this article. And I just wanted to sort of blossom in your mind and get your thoughts, Alex. A Catholic priest in Arizona has resigned after he was found to have performed baptisms incorrectly throughout his career, rendering the rite invalid for thousands of people. The Catholic Diocese of Phoenix announced on its website that it determined, after careful study, that this reverend had used the wrong wording in baptism performed up until June 17th, 2021. He had been off by a single word. During the baptisms in both English and Spanish, the Reverend used the phrase, "We baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit," when he should have been saying, "I baptize you." It's not the community that baptizes a person and incorporates them into the Church of Christ. Rather, it is Christ and Christ alone who presides at all sacraments, and therefore it is Christ who baptizes, the diocese said. If you were baptized using the wrong words, that means your baptism is invalid and you are not baptized. It's believed that the priest has been using the incorrect word since 1995.
Whoa.
A spokesperson from the diocese said, "I do not have an exact number of people affected, but I believe the number is in the thousands." Skipping ahead here a little bit, it says, as far as the diocese is aware, all of the other sacraments that this reverend conferred are valid, but because baptism is the sacrament that grants access to all the others, a botched baptism could invalidate any subsequent sacraments, including confirmation, marriage, and holy orders.
Marriage? Oh my god.
What this means for you, the diocese said, is if your baptism was invalid and you received other sacraments, you may need to repeat some or all of those sacraments after you are validly baptized as well.
Whoa. So I have a first thought, which I would need a more religious person to answer for me, but what if someone was baptized and then died? They weren't, so they couldn't get into heaven? That was my first reaction. Secondly, because one word? I mean, you can't just fudge like...
Well,
is God so strict that he's like, nope, sorry, send it back. It wasn't correct.
That was my first thought is like, is there some God with his arms crossed that's like, you're not doing it right. I want it done specifically this way, and you did it wrong. It doesn't count. It's kind of like I don't think we've talked at all about like, and I won't go too much into it, of like some of the crazy Mormon practices with the loopholes where when you hear them, you're just like, do you really think that you are besting a divine like you know, entity?
You found the secret, the loophole?
Yeah, exactly. I feel so bad for this priest too. There's one line in here that says that the priest will devote his energy and full-time ministry to help remedy this and heal those affected. He remains a priest in good standing according to the diocese, but were forced to resign, basically. I mean, as somebody who was, in their own view, trying to do something that was good and trying to live what he believed is the best life, to know that you now carry this, like, mental weight of thousands of people who have not been welcomed into your faith because you said one word wrong.
And how many people are now going to be like, oh, I was baptized by that priest, I gotta go redo everything? Probably not many. Even very religious people, I'm sure, would be like, it's fine, like, this is a rounding error, you know, no big deal. But it draws a weird line between the church says no, but who are you now to go and say that you know more or don't care? Or it's just, that's actually hilarious. But
yeah, it just it just blew my mind that it's so who knew the church was so technical.
Also a weird line. Yeah, you see why he's saying we, because there's three people or three sort of spirits, as if you say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that's three. You would say we. It's like the royal we.
I think actually though,
or is he saying that church?
We is in the church because the comment from the diocese was, it is not the community that baptizes a person and incorporates them into the Church of Christ. Rather, it is Christ and Christ alone. Well, so I think you're saying we is, like, you're standing in a room with a ton of people and you're like, we is the community.
But if I'm him, I go, no, we as in the Holy Trinity. And they're saying, nope, just Christ. It's just Christ. One of those three. The other two are not involved. To which I say, they kind of are, but like, wow, yeah. It'll be interesting to kind of see what the fallout actually ends up being in addition to this, if people start going back and redoing things.
Yeah. Anyways, that was my timely since the article came out today, and we touched on religion. That just blew my mind.
That's fantastic. If
Alrighty,
anybody has thoughts, please send them my way. Let's talk about protesting. So, I think this is good actually, because there's sort of been two giant protests from both sides, which is great because we could kind of compare and contrast how each of these large protests have gone. I'm referring to what I'll call Black Lives Matter protests, and that's a bubble sort of encompassing most of 2020's action and largely aimed at the police and those types of things. And now the right is protesting Canada, and this is done by the truckers and all of that's going in the news right now. So we sort of have compare and contrasting sides, but we just want to start, I think, of like, as you were starting here, maybe I'll kick it to you. You were talking about what's the goal. So maybe just even between, is it a common maybe between those two things, but just if someone sets out to protest, what do you think the goal is?
I've talked with some of my friends about this, and I sort of was asking almost the same question of like, what's the point of a protest? And I think you can branch it into sort of three different buckets. You could say a protest is about wanting to draw attention and get other voters or people to change their mind and vote in a particular way. You could say that that's option one. Option two, is like a protest is just for the person to go out and get re-energized themselves, to be surrounded by other like-minded people and be like, okay, I'm not alone. I think about this an example too, if like, let's say you're in a huge family that's like super conservative, but you're really liberal out, but you want to go out and like be around your people, right? Because
that's
you feel
your
sort of
community in a way, and it's
exactly
reinforcing that. Okay.
That's option 2. Or option 3 is just you're trying to draw attention from leadership to say, look, you know, especially with the internet, it's so hard to know how many people actually believe in something, right? Is this just a few people with microphones? Is this actually a giant chunk? So you want to signal to the leadership, sort of government leaders, hey, we are a huge crowd of people, and if you don't do this, you're going to be held accountable, whether, you know, sort of at the polls or when it comes to voting, that there's going to be a wave of people that are going to.
If I could add too, not just leadership, because I think it's also just marketing for a cause. Because even if you're not trying to change someone's mind, I've seen protests or someone's holding a sign, and I go, "Oh, I didn't even realize that was a problem for some people." And so you're just going, "Oh, I agree with you. I didn't need to have my mind changed. I just didn't know that that was an issue." And so more than just leadership.
Yeah, so that's my option 1 is you're getting other voters you're trying to convince other voters. But I see what you're saying. You're almost like getting a little bit more fine detailed of like, there could be you're trying to get other voters to change their mind, or just fire them up or bring a little bit more awareness.
Be aware. Yeah, correct. Yeah, because I might not be opposed. I might just say, I didn't know that was happening. So, but I'm on board. And so thanks for, it's like a marketing almost a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And part of the reason I was talking about this with one of my friends, and this was a while back, I was having this conversation. This was definitely before the George Floyd stuff. It might have been around, at the time, Colin Kaepernick and like that sort of landscape as a discussion, is that I personally, I'm not a huge, like, I don't have this deep need to go out in the streets with a sign. Like, I don't.
Same.
I'm if you want to go protest, that's fine, and it's your American right, and there are things you can do and things that you can't do, right? You can't. I don't think you should be able to like, you know, trap people up against a wall, or like if you really like shut down. And it's debatable, especially
we'll get
here
to some of that, but
in Minneapolis, where they were shutting down highways a ton about what sort of the right action is there, because you want to toe this line of like causing a little bit of friction so that there's more awareness, but you don't want to restrict other people's rights, and that's fine. You can go do all that. To me, I always think the best protest is a vote. If you really care about something, you got to show up, even in your local elections and your off-cycle elections. Like, that is how you do the best signal.
Yeah, I'm also one of those people that don't really feel a need to get out in the street and do anything like that. I totally agree. If people want to do that, that's fine. And by the way, that's true across the board. If one side can do it, both sides can do it. Everybody should be able to do it. But I tend to agree with you. There are very few issues that would rile me up enough to like go to the Capitol and hold a sign. But I also go, I don't really know what this is doing. Short of, I guess, some of those things that we talked about. But like you said, I'll go vote, and maybe I'll use those people to influence a vote, but my vote, but which I guess then makes it did possibly something, but it just doesn't seem like a good use of my time, honestly.
Yeah, and I think that I agree, and I reflect on that agreement in 2 different ways. Number 1, maybe we just have, like, our rights aren't under attack as much, as just because of the nature of us being.
Well, yeah, but a lot of protests too, I kind of look at and go, this isn't even a real, well, it's, who am I to say that? But
well, then that's my point. Is like you it doesn't impact you enough to drive you to the street, right? Of like your views on sexual orientation or your reproductive rights are not on the chopping block. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, and this is why I think it's good that we're having this conversation, is this the most productive tool? Well,
so that's maybe where I was going with it too, of like, for some particular ones, it's like, this is how you're choosing to spend your time. For example, the people that stand outside of Planned Parenthood and harass all the people that go in, I'm like, first of all, we're bordering on this isn't actually a protest anymore. And number 2, don't you have something better to do? Like, why are you using your time to do this? And maybe we'll get into this a little bit later too, but protests can also very easily backfire and hurt public opinion for your cause.
If some stuff goes down, definitely, right? If you're blocking roads and taking people off and things escalate out of hand, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, one of the points I have written down is protesting is probably good, I would say, but violence is bad. So the minute that it bubbles up and starts approaching harassment or violence, at that point, the protest should be over. And then I sort of support shutting it down. And I think that if that was sort of the known way that these things get handled, protesting would become a lot safer and messages wouldn't get lost. If it was just known that if someone swings a fist, we're getting shut down, I think it makes the protest more powerful in one way.
It's politically focused then?
Yeah. Well, and you and I talked about, at least throughout the George Floyd Black Lives Matter stuff, part of the problem with those protests was we didn't know what the goal was or what do you want out of this? And so I think a lot of protests get lost in the what is it exactly that you want? And then you don't get one answer and things that people don't really know. They're just kind of out there with their community, like you said. But I think a good protest also needs to have a clear goal. Like we talk about the gay rights movement as being pretty successful because they had clear goals, which was essentially just, we want to get married.
Well, part of the reason too, I think that the gay rights and specifically the same-sex marriage was so successful is because they actually doubled down on the values from the other side, where they the other side is like, we want to be like,
we want what you have, almost.
Yeah, exactly. We think your concept of family values and marriage and all of these sort of things, if you cut out the sliver of definition of marriage is between a man and a woman, let's park that for a second. But right. We believe in this concept of committing yourself to a partner, having marriage, having a good unit to raise children. And they're like, we agree with you on all those things. And it's tough to then have a fight against that when you have this group of people being like, yeah, we want what you have. We agree these are good values.
That's very true. Versus, go ahead.
And I was just going to say that sexual orientation is something that is across a ton of different communities. It's much easier to break in with your movement when you have a gay person at your work, have a gay person as a neighbor, and you can you have that sort of it's in your backyard. It's not just somebody else who's in a part of a different community. I think that's a huge part of it as well. Yeah,
and what I was going to say is that this is going to be like a how-to protest by the time we're done with that. But contrast that now with maybe some of the 2020 things where it was like, you suck, everything you're doing is bad, you need to do it this way, which just isn't, people aren't even going to listen to that. If had it gone a different way, maybe that protest would have gone better, or maybe been more well received.
Well, and we've talked a little bit in the past about how when protests get sort of hijacked by opportunists who just want to smash stuff or just want to grab media attention, that's where you've lost your political power in a way. You've lost your messaging, really. Your focus.
I totally agree, and that's where people need to be smarter, I think, because you need to think a little bit more ahead, because if that stuff starts happening, those within the protest need to shut it down. Mm-hmm. And I think what we see a lot of times, coming from both sides really, they sort of use it as this is what happens now when we don't get our way type of a thing, when that's bad and that's turning people away. And that what should happen is no, we still have a clear message. Those people don't represent the message, and we're going to try to get rid of those people so that we can put the focus back on the message. But that's not what happened, and you start to hear things like, what were some of the common phrases back in 2020, violence is the voice of the unheard, and they're almost backing them up to do more damage.
When I went around, I during that real week sort of after George Floyd, when things were crazy in Minneapolis, I was biking around a lot in the afternoon to just go to different protests and kind of just drinking the energy of the city is the best way to sort of describe it, and be there for this extremely historical moment, as well as stand in solidarity with the community, because like everybody in Minneapolis, the true sort of Minneapolis, Minnesota people, I think, came together and like this is deplorable that happened in our community, and I wanted to sort of stand with those people and be a part of that as well. But I saw signs that were like, burn it all to the ground, or like tear the entire system down. And I was like, I'm confused what your messaging is here of like this.
Well, and now, so let's take a look now at the truckers up in Canada. It's so funny now to see those same people saying, well, they shouldn't be protesting. Where are the police? Where's the military? They need to come in and stop this. And that's where I go, hold on a second. Shouldn't you be happy about this? Like, there really hasn't been much violence up there, good, but this protesting, these are the voices of the unheard, right? Like, so I'm confused. I'm not really confused, but this is why you have to be careful, though. And it's funny now to say 2020 was very anti-police and all of that, and now they're going, well, the police need to do more. Where are the police? And it's like, well, aren't you happy that they're not involved? What do you mean you're not? Like, pick a side, pick a stance, though, and stick with it throughout all of it. And so for, I think most people, though, they look at a lot of the violence that happened in 2020 and buildings being burned down and stuff and saying, that's bad. Can y'all just come out and say that's bad? And now, if any of, there's really, again, not that level of destruction in Canada, but if there was, that's bad. If people are getting into fights and things, that's bad too. It doesn't matter the party, and it shouldn't be, well, when it's my side, it's okay. Well, no, because now you've lost a lot of credibility.
Yeah.
Just in general at all. I
think, and I'm going to say this without having done a ton of research on the Canadian side of like what the state is, and I can speak very close to home about the Minneapolis stuff because I lived there and was in that community. I haven't been up to the Canadian border or anything, but it just, from my vantage point, feels like the left, or I won't even call it the left. During the George Floyd protests, it was there was an edge of destruction to it, and I personally struggled to understand what they were trying to change. I know it was about police brutality, it was about how African Americans interact with the police, but I didn't exactly know what was their sort of criteria for success of like what they would call like this is the line in the sand that they want changed. Whereas the right, instead of the edge of destruction, the vibe I've got from what I've seen, and very fortunately I'm not on Twitter, so this has not consumed a lot of my time, but from just people talking about it, it seems more like a tailgate. It seems more like a party up there rather than with an edge of destruction. And
it's economic destruction.
That's true. It's not property destruction. But their line of what they want done is no more mandate. Like
theirs is pretty clear. That's true.
That we want removed.
Which they're starting to sort of get. Now the problem is they're not leaving. Or, where does that end too? Where do you go, okay, well, it worked. Let's go. But you just have such a large group of people with no real leadership that doesn't happen. But my understanding was there were parts of Canada that were getting ready to get rid of the mandates. Now, also, I don't know if you know this was breaking news to me today. Trudeau has enacted some emergency powers for the first time ever to help squash this protest, this tailgate. And that is crazy to me, because hearing about these emergency powers, which give him and the federal government a lot of extra power, especially to do things around stopping like financial backing of these people, basically making it a criminal to support them in any way. But like, really, emergency powers, which are only supposed to be enacted when like the sovereignty of Canada is under threat, to which I go, really? Like,
I guess it doesn't. I saw that today as well. I did, but that doesn't surprise me because of just what I've seen through COVID, where in order for the government to operationally do things, sometimes you need to have that level of declare. A better example would be in Minnesota. You have to declare a certain emergency to bring in the National Guard.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
or
true.
like in order for the governor here in Minnesota to be able to make certain claims and stuff about the mask mandates and sort of things like that. Although this actually there's lawsuits going on in Minnesota over this. There was like state health emergencies or
Sure.
like government emergencies put in place, which then actually required the state assembly to stay in session like over and over again. So what I just saw was Canada being like, look, if we want to be able to deploy Canadian military forces or things like this, we have to operationally declare this emergency first. That's how I took it as.
Okay, that's a little different than how it was fed to me, but it also is a bit of a weird precedent that this is the event that caused you to, for the
true.
first time
Ever.
ever, enact these emergency powers. I also think it's wrong to step in and not let people financially support these groups. I think that's, and again, that goes both ways, but I think that's a little weird and not a great precedent. Or if that's the precedent, the next time Black Lives Matter is out there, same rules. And then I'll be like, okay, fine.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is scratching a little bit on the mega question of what is the role of government. Because one could argue it's the role of government to also secure economic stability. And as you've said, this protest
That's why I
potentially
think they're finally stepping in, is because
Yeah.
of these truckers blocking bridges and things. There's, I think it's like car lots and things having to shut down in the U.S. because they're not getting shipments because everything's all jammed up. So you are now causing some real problems. So I guess it is the government's job to step in and do something.
I just like to think, too, the fact that this is the first emergency order and just how Canada is positioned mostly geographically, like, you know, oceans on both sides, really only touches the United States as an actual border, where like somebody rolls into the Canadian government, they're like, "Oh, hey, we got this law here, that we could use. We've never used that before. When are we ever going to use it, though? There's never going to be like an attack on this soil, eh?
Let's try it
Don't
out.
you know?
Let's try it out.
Yeah. Let's, hey, Justin, you want to sign this, and we'll see what happens, eh? We can go smoke a couple darts then, eh?
We'll sign it down at Tim Hortons. Sorry, Canadians, we love you.
I do love Canadians, but
I love Canada. I love Canada. It's a great country. Now, I heard a thing today too that said actually, if you think about a lot of these COVID-related protests, it's sort of a net positive. Now, hear me out, because some of these are annoying and the people are off their rockers and all that kind of stuff. However, I think it's a good thing that if another wave of COVID were to happen, or another virus, governments are going to have to think twice about doing the same things that they did.
true.
And I think that's actually a good thing.
Like we've had a bit of a pilot run, and now we can see like, okay, if this happens again, what worked well, what didn't. In terms of your like stuff that is, I don't want to say a little bit like, it takes me some patience to be like, okay, I'll just look at the data, let's hear it out. The fact that Florida, and I don't have the data right in front of me, so I'm willing to eat my words later on this, but my understanding is like places that have done strict masking versus places that haven't done that and have remained economically open, like Florida, have seen similar case rates.
Yeah, the only difference I've seen is it took longer in the mask states, but they got to the same. They had pretty much ended up at the same spot.
So, to your point of like, hey, if we have a version 2 of this true pandemic, like, let's crunch the numbers from the last one. Let's take a look at what worked and what didn't. And what's really sad, Sam Harris brought this up on his podcast, and it made me really pause for a moment, is like, COVID was just an amazing advertisement for anyone considering bioterrorism. You just had the best commercial ever for how to disrupt a country.
That's true, but I think, again, some of these protests then are good, so that we go, that one didn't really work, or the people revolted on that one. So maybe we think twice about that, but these things maybe did work. so let's do that. Or these. It's sort of I forgot what it's called when you look at this and go, this little bit of effort was a big win, so let's do that. But a lot of effort was a small win, so maybe we don't do that one because it might not be worth it. There's a name
Kind of
for
like
that. But
cost to value analysis.
yeah, right.
Value to effort. That's how I think about it. This is a slight side tangent in thinking about how people are going to look at COVID and how it relates to the political spectrum. I think after COVID is a little bit more in the rear view mirror. We're truly sort of out of it. It moves more to the virus moves more to an endemic, I think it's called, rather than a pandemic, right?
Endemic.
Just is with us.
Yep. Correct.
I feel like I can already see the seeds of the next political ideology war or like tribalism happening right now, where in 1 to 2 years, hopefully 1 to 2 years, whenever we actually get out of it,
we'll say 2 to 5.
We're going to see a group of people go, wow, that was an insane time for America. Can you believe that the government was trying to tell me how many people I can have in my own home for holidays, that they were trying to do this stuff? We need to take away power from the government. And then on the other side, you're going to have people go, wow, that was crazy. That was just the wildest time of some people's lives. Can you believe that all these people were out, spreading the sickness, and the government was like limited from actually being able to take control? We need to give the government more power. Those are going to be the camps that come out and just add gasoline to the fire after this.
That's a really interesting observation. I think you're 100% right. The only thing that sort of grinds my gears about the whole thing, for the people that say we need to give the government more power, I would point to a lot of things like, well, for example, the Super Bowl was this past weekend. So I'd point to that and say, you were required, my understanding, you were required to wear a mask inside the stadium in LA because LA County has a mask mandate. I'm assuming you watched the Super Bowl, Zach.
I watched the first half, and then for the second half, I had to actually go to a concert because a concert I was supposed to go to in December got rescheduled on that date, which was a little
good
unfortunate.
enough,
but yes, I saw celebrities when they
how
panned
many
the
had a
camera
mask?
around. Barely any.
None. Yeah, right. So, okay, great. Even the mayor of LA, two games in a row now, has not worn a mask. So, my point is, if you are the government, you're going to make mandates, or if you are somebody that says the government needs to do more, great. What do you do about that? Because the minute that I see all those people, which, by the way, this has pretty much happened for me, the minute that I saw political figures making rules and then walking around without masks on, I went, oh, okay, great. So it's not that big of a deal, and I'm going to just do what our political figures are doing, and I'm done with that.
Well, if you're the mayor of LA, you claim to hold your breath whenever you don't have a mask on.
Which is that? But I did see that. But then, so that was during the NFC Championship. But then in the Super Bowl, didn't have it on again. So great. So you're holding your breath the whole time? There was one too. Was it Atlanta, where she was like in a nightclub or something, and was like, well, I was just dancing and feeling the music, and I was like, great. So I didn't know this, but your rules don't apply as long as you are dancing and feeling the music. So, great. So to the people that say, we need the government to do more, can you believe people didn't act? I can, because the government basically made rules and then said that the rules don't matter. So if you want to do it again, if you make those rules, if everybody in the stadium had a mask on, totally different story. Yeah. And I go, wow, okay, this must be pretty important. Everybody's doing it. But that's not what happened. Yeah, exactly. So if I see someone make a rule and then not follow the rule, immediately I go, well, that rule must not be that important. Which is why I tend to fall to the other side, mostly because of that reason. So that's just one of those things of like, you can do more government stuff, but then you gotta do it.
Follow through.
Yeah, exactly. Or else it doesn't matter.
This reminds me a little bit, too, of the, I believe it's Andrew Jackson, who has a quote when he was trying to stick Native Americans, force them into reservations, and the case went up to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that what he was doing was, unconstitutional, or he couldn't do it. And when they asked Andrew Jackson about it, he said, the Supreme Court has made their rule, let's see them enforce it. To this idea of, the government can come out and make these claims, too, but if they're also like the way that they plan on enforcing it is through groups of populations, maybe the police as a whole, who doesn't like also sees the same thing you're seeing. Is like, we're not going to enforce this.
Which Canada's having a problem with right now too, is police being like, we're not going to get these people out of here. Like,
well, wasn't it too? They were calling the tow truck people to be like, hey, can you tow all of these? And they're like, what? They're saying, no, sorry, we all have COVID. We can't actually go in contact with people.
But that's part of the problem too.
Enforcement, exactly. Yes, that's my point.
I like that Jackson quote there. Yeah, like,
unfortunately,
they made the rule. Let's see it.
It's a terrible example because I think it led to like the Trail of Tears and leading all these Native Americans to reservations. But the concept of it is like, you need to have enforcement with your actual.
And I was thinking
lay
this
of the land.
during the Black Lives Matter protests of all the places that wanted to get rid of police. Okay, vote on it, and if you vote on it, you have to get rid of them, and then let's talk in a year and see if you really like it or not. Or, I mean, this happened in Minneapolis. You would think if any city really wanted to change their police program, it would be them, and the citizens voted no. So
yeah,
okay.
That particular one, my understanding is they just wanted to amend the city charter to say because in our city charters you need a certain amount of police per capita, and they wanted to take that out, I believe.
There was more, but the problem was they wanted to like get rid of the police department and replace it with a new department.
Yeah.
To which most people went, well, what's the new department?
Plan?
And they were like, well, it's not the police anymore. It's this. And they go, okay, well, you haven't changed anything.
Yeah. There was a part of it was a marketing problem of like, there was no clear picture of what they wanted to put.
All right. Let's get back to protesting a little bit because I have one last question here. Activism, which I will sort of say when I'm referring to activism, what I'm talking about is people wearing Eat the Rich on a dress at the Met Gala. Or I believe in the latest Miss Universe or Miss World or something, girls were wearing things on their dresses or things like this. Yeah, slogans or just whatever cause they wanted to promote. Is this good or bad? Or Eminem in the halftime show knelt, even though the NFL told him not to. Colin Kaepernick.
Well, is this
good or bad?
Before I address this question, I just want to point out how selfish it is that the Earth has hosted Miss Universe but has not invited any other life forms or planets to come actually show up. So just stick that in your note as feedback for maybe inviting more life forms to Miss Universe.
And I should start by saying I don't have a problem with these people's particular causes. They can support a cause, whatever. But are we going to end up flooded with everybody's issue?
That's my thought. If like sports has become such an avenue for activism. And on one side of my brain, I totally get it. You have a platform as this athlete who has eyes. You almost feel this duty to say, I want to draw attention to this thing that I care about and why I want to bring justice almost to it. And so I get that. But on the other side of it, I also think like, what is your true role? You're an athlete.
Yeah.
You're kind of an entertainer to a certain level.
That's 100% what they are.
Yeah, and so I just, is it really is that the place to do it? I don't know. It's tough to imagine if I was some big movie star and people were asking me political questions. I'd like to think I'd be like, why are you asking me this? Like, why do you?
So I think about that too. Same.
I'll go grab beers with you. And if you turn your recorder off, I'll talk to you about this. But like, why do you care what I, as an actor, think about this? I mean, this is so many comedians punch at this where they're like, let's ask the person who makes millions of dollars and lives in a mansion what they think all of these millions of people in America should do.
Right. And my answer would be like yours of like, I don't know. Why are you asking me? Which actually, to Joe Rogan's credit, even though he's been through the ringer here, he usually says, I'm a moron. I'm a comedian. Yeah. I don't know why people take all these quotes and like it's gospel. Like, I'm not telling them to do that. Nobody should listen to me. But so some take it differently.
I think where I sort of am at is like an acknowledgement that this activism is going to be a part of sports. And knowing that the consequences of what the athletes do, right? You are potentially going to, if what you're doing is really kind of down the line political, you're going to tick off 50% of America by what you do. And maybe they're saying like, I don't care. This thing is important enough that I need to bring justice to it. And a little bit, I have props to you that you want to do this thing, but also like know the consequences.
Well, and do whatever you want off the field.
Yeah,
that's fine. You go on Twitter, support whatever you want. I don't set up a whole protest. That's great, but whatever you do. And by the way, I support your right to do it on the field too, but I also support the teams saying we're not going to have that, and you're cut or.
I support the ability of private organizations to enact rules and not be forced to do something by the government. That's what I support.
Right. That's you said it in better words.
Yeah. Now it gets really tricky of like, do I have this right that the private organization can't block? But I
no.
Well, I mean that exists. Of like, I can't just fire you because of your skin color. That's a right.
That's true.
The federal right. So there are regulations of the private organizations by the federal government. That's why this is a sticky thing. But I also think like you don't like the okay. So now we're getting at the heart of this of like, do you have the right to protest? And my cheap answer is kind of.
I kind of would say I lean towards yes.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't march into a building naked or like disrupt work that's going on at it. But if you want to, I mean, that's really tough. If you were like, this goes back to didn't we talk about like if your private company made you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance every day when the CEO would come over to the loudspeaker?
Yeah.
If like you were like, no, I'm not going to do that. Right. And my guess is there's rules where if organizations are like, you have to come over and pray before we start the workday, you can't get fired for not praying.
That's true.
So you do have your own sort of like.
So the question is, does protesting fall under what would be the First Amendment? Which also, you need to extend the First Amendment then to private companies because it's really only in place around government sort of actions. But
well, it's around individual actions is how I think of it. The government as a whole.
Government can't do anything about it, about what you're doing.
Correct.
That's what I meant.
But the whole point of the government existing is to defend rights of the people.
Oh, that's true.
That's why government exists in the first place. Is so that all these organizations
ideally, yes,
can't do that, right? I want to hire all these children to be chimney sweeps.
Yeah,
you
that's
can't
true.
do that.
So through that lens, which I really like, the government should step in and allow people to protest on the field. Then basically. However,
to a certain degree, it can't be disruptive. It can't
illegal.
Right, all of these sort of things. And so, I mean, this is the whole. Let's flip this to a crazy thing of like, I'm going to speak this sort of language in a different politically charged space of like abortion, right? I mean, the future of abortion in America is up for potential change as we have a pretty conservative Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But the idea right now is federally. People have the right to an abortion after Roe v. Wade, and different states are pushing that boundary of like, okay, if it's a federal right that you have access to an abortion, that's not saying that you have access to an abortion the day before you know you're going to deliver your baby. And so different states take different approaches as to where they are like, we want to have this rule that is a state rule, and the question that's always in the courts is this infringing on the right to an access to an abortion?
Could you imagine if it turns out Colin Kaepernick can kneel in California but he can't kneel in Washington?
That would be wild.
Or like, because abortion,
you can only kneel on road games.
Yeah. Yeah. That turns into a state thing. Well, and
but now, just to play the flip, though, I don't want a government that is going to come in and force like private organizations to do a ton of stuff that are not defined rights.
Yeah, agreed.
Now, but at the same time, government exists to defend the rights of the individual. So this is why it's so interesting. This is why I love following Supreme Court cases, because like how they net out set precedent for what the lines are.
They're the ones deciding.
Exactly, where the federal... Well, actually, they're the ones interpreting. The ones deciding technically is legislation, but then it gets messy, and then the lawyers and the courts come in and adjudicate the law.
right?
I guess what you mean by you can say that's a version of deciding, but I would actually say the
That's
one
what I
sort
meant.
of like deciding the law, like writing the law, is
That's
a
not
state's,
what I meant. Yeah, you explained it better.
and then adjudicating the law, it comes down to the
Yeah,
court
I have
systems.
to laugh if I go back again to wearing "Eat the Rich" to the Met Gala. That one, like, hey, I support your right to do it. The reason that one doesn't make sense to me is you are literally all around all the people that you want to eat. So
That's your political statement.
what's funny though is then all those people are wanting pictures with her and like rubbing elbows with her, and it's like, well, wait a second, shouldn't you be fighting? Like,
Yeah. I mean,
which goes back to my, is this a good or bad thing in pageants and things like that? Do you start to just judge based on who's got a better cause, whether or not they even care?
that's problematic.
I agree.
And I don't know, maybe this is really cold for me to say, and is really a deep privilege of the fact that I don't have these extreme problems in my life that I feel need to have justice brought to them. But when I see activism in an athletics sense, a lot of times I just think of it as annoying.
If it's on the field, I agree.
Yes, that's what I mean. Like
If it's off the field, great.
Yeah, sure, whatever. Do whatever you want. As a
When it's
baptism.
on the field, I agree. It's kind of annoying. I came here to just watch a football game.
Yeah.
But I also am not one to be like so angry at them for doing it. I just kind of go, okay,
Same.
roll my eyes. All right, let's get to the game.
When I see sort of like the NFL helmets that all say like "end hate," I'm like, sure, like yeah,
Sure,
It kind of gets into the like crazy game of trying to say that you denounce everything, where that just becomes like you're chasing your tail when people are like, oh, you've denounced hate, but like, have you denounced silence?
True,
And, like, you
yeah.
have to denounce literally everything.
It might be Eric Weinstein saying, it was either him or Neil deGrasse. No, I think it was Eric Weinstein. Was saying, can we just come up with a phrase that says, like, encompassing all obvious sort of things? This is my statement. Meaning, like, taking all of the, I know racism is bad, and I know that this is violence. And can we just have an all-encompassing statement that says, like, taking all of that into account, I believe this. I don't believe you should kneel for the flag. Not me personally, but just as an example. Taking all of that into account, here's how I feel. Because otherwise you're left with what you're saying of just like, I understand that that is bad. I also know that this other thing is bad. This should be completely denounced. Those people are evil. All of that being said, I feel like they're doing the wrong thing. So he's like, let's just
oh, you
shortcut
missed this thing. Do you
let's
not
just
care
shortcut
about
it. Yeah.
Do you not care about minors' rights because you didn't talk about it?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
So obscure problem.
You need the, what's the law term of, like, if it's not specifically said, just it's included
Yeah.
or something. There's some terminology like that.
I feel like we found a little bit some good jabs in it at protesting here, but I'm not sure if we.
I think
truly
we
got to
kept
the
walking
bottom
around
of
the just giant bubble, stabbing at it. I don't think we popped it. I feel like there was more here, and we didn't quite find it.
Well, partially too is we started with the concept of changing someone's mind,
Yeah.
and then rolled into just looking at the left and the right in different protests of 2020 to 22. Now I feel like I'm doing a play-by-play. Well, they started here, and if you take a look at if you roll the tape back, he bootlegged out. They talked about 2020 and 2022.
Draw some yellow arrows over the podcast.
They made the pass over then into activism, but unfortunately, they dropped the ball.
My biggest thing with all of it is this. I guess if I could sum up my whole thing, I support protesting, but the rules that we as a society or a culture come up with around protesting, for example, burning buildings down, most people agree is bad, or shooting people or anything like that, have to apply throughout all protesting now.
Agreed.
That's my biggest sort of gripe with everyone painting these truckers now as like evil and awful people, and I go, well, they're just you guys 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I agree too that like I support people's right to protest, to go out and protest. I think you have to consider the rights of the individuals as well as the rights as organizations, right, as we sort of talk through here, and the government's role to protect rights. I also, here would be my sort of claim out there, or like encouragement for takeaway of people, is think about the best tools to actually get somebody to change your mind or to join your team or join your political, or your alignment of your idea. It doesn't even have to be political. We'll just call it an idea. And ask yourself the question, have you changed your mind on something because you drove by and saw a podcast or you saw the amount of people supporting something? Or have you changed your mind because somebody talked to you about it and was patient and kind and loving and respectful, and they allowed you to ask endless questions instead of shouting in your face or waving signs at you? And I think that is why I sort of scratch my head at protesting. I'm combining protesting and activism.
Yeah,
protism.
I kind of like that.
I look at the biggest changes of like deep fundamental things in my life that I've changed, and it was like 2 to 3 year processes where I found really good mentors that I could ask a lot of questions, and they were very kind and patient with me, and that's how I shifted.
Totally. Or I've had to sit and think about it for a long time. It doesn't happen fast. Yeah, and to sticking with that too, I think protests need to do a better job of calling, we touched on this earlier, but calling out their own and saying, hey, no. What that guy's saying is not what we're here for. So if you're going to keep saying that, like, go away. You're not part of the group anymore. And it's okay to people have a little bit different things, but just look inward within the protest as well and say, hey, you're going to make people to backtrack. That's the opposite of what we want. You know, stop throwing Molotov cocktails. you gotta go.
You gotta go. That's
And
a
that
different
would
protest.
that would draw me and go, wow, those people are taking this very seriously. I'm going to spend even more time researching their view or something like that. I think personally. I have one more question. If you want to go into overtime a little bit here.
I will just say this. I was listening to a great video the other day that was about sort of this idea of like how to change people's minds. And the closing line of it was really, really good one, which is like, facts don't change minds, people do. And so you have to take in the whole concept of like a person and their belief systems and their history and their bias and their relationship. That's what's going to change the mind, not just this fact shoved in their face.
Certainly not shoved in their face. Yeah, you need to feed them the fact, spoon feed, hand
exactly.
feed them.
And that it
With
referenced
care
also
and love.
Exactly, respect, patience. Because it just quickly it referenced they did experiments where they had two groups, a group that believed in climate change and a group that did not believe in climate change, and they put out a study that's it wasn't a real study. It was kind of like they showed the groups a fake study. An example, they showed a fake study that said climate change is backed by all this, the research showed that climate change is real. And then in the other group, another set of both groups, they showed again sort of a mocked up study that said showing research that climate change wasn't real. And in both cases, the group took the study, and when it aligned with their views, they used it to reinforce and debate with it. And the opposing group just basically said it was a sham or was
Threw
fake.
it out. Yeah.
So both sides did it, right? When running the experiment both different ways. And that's a little bit by what I mean of like facts don't change minds.
I see, yeah.
You have to think about the holistic person and the bias in the history and all of the crazy cognitive things that go into holding a belief or a narrative. That's what I mean.
And knowing that sometimes even for you to just crack that belief a little bit is a pretty big win. And not getting them to go,
absolutely.
I guess I was wrong for the last 20 years. That's so hard and not going to happen overnight, like we said.
Right.
That'll take years.
Yeah.
But if you can plant a seed, that's a win.
Put the rock in the shoe, right, as we've said.
Put the rock in the shoe, yeah.
Get them from a 7 to a 6.9. That is a win.
That's a win. Right. One more thing I wanted to bring up. So there was a picture of a truck. This is related to the Canada thing again. That
This is a
red.
captcha exam. I have to click on which pictures were the truck.
Yeah. Please prove that you're not a robot. But it read, I got fired for thinking I was free. And this whole concept of well, I thought I was free, which is sort of something that's come up through COVID and now this. Part of me sort of read that and went, have we been sold a little bit of a lie by our governments of we're the best because we're free, you all can do whatever you want? Is that almost like a marketing thing that now we're realizing maybe isn't as true as we thought that it was this whole time?
I always think of, there's a line in the musical Hamilton where they're talking about the Constitution, and they says it's full of contradictions, and the next line is, so is independence. Like, independence is full of contradictions in the fact that, like, you're not free to go murder somebody. You're not
That's
free
what I'm
to
saying.
go fire.
Are we really that free? And I can understand how people would want to be freer. And again, you pointed out there's people that want more government, people that want less government. But I just sort of went, wow, are we just sort of, maybe we're living in the most free, but it's maybe not as free as I thought. And maybe these past few years have sort of proven that. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm not taking a stance. I'm just sort of reflecting.
Yeah, I like how you framed it up a little bit of, like, we've been sold this marketing story from the
government
country, from the government, that says you're totally free.
Which is, we got to go fight for this freedom, right? We have to go do these things to protect our freedom. And we kind of all go, okay, yeah, that sounds good. And now we're going, wait a second. What if we're not that free?
Well, I mean, this is like a reason why some of the people on the left that are in more of like the socialist camp are like super mad that when you say, like, this is what I spend on my taxes, I have people going off to war, and this is what I get from healthcare. Like, this is the
I'm on their side with that. With a couple other things too, of like, this is what I'm getting for my taxes.
I'm a firm believer, if I ever run for office, you will see me, a big part of my platform will be, you will get an itemized receipt from the government as to where money went for the tax breakdown of the year.
Awesome.
You know,
well, with blockchain, 28% went to
I'm making these up, like 28, a line, like a CVS receipt that will say this percent went to education, this percent went to the army and military defenses. That should go out to every paying taxpayer.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I remember Austin was looking at taking some money away from its police through the George Floyd thing, and they sent like an email or some sort of link that you could go in and make a pie chart of the budget. They gave you the budget, and you allocated it to various city works, and you could say a little bit more to the water, a little bit less to the police, a little bit more to the golf courses, and you could do this and hit submit, and they reviewed all of these different submissions.
Interesting.
Which I thought was cool. Never seen anything like that before.
That is interesting. Was there a comment box where you could slap in like, I beat SimCity 2000, I know how to run a city.
I don't remember. I remember putting a lot of money into the golf courses.
Just
not a lot. Just like I bumped the golf courses up a little bit, you know, because there were some things where I go, I don't care about that. Stop spending money on this. A little more money over here.
It's cool that you filled it out. I'd probably bump up bike trails. Like, that's what I love.
Yeah, parks was one, I think. Public parks, hiking, that kind of stuff. It was all the public works of a city. So, yeah, that was in there. Which, yeah, transportation, buses, all that kind of stuff. That was all in there. It was just a big pie chart.
I've played SimCity 2000. You got to look out for those tornadoes and that monster that shows up.
Have you seen my city skylines?
That's cool. I didn't know. It's a good idea to crowdsource where people's thoughts are at.
Yeah.
It's a different way than just straight voting, and I'm all for creative ideas to get thoughts.
I don't know that they did anything with it, but I thought it was cool for them to ask the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts? I like this ending on thinking about, has the government maybe over-marketed to us about what freedom actually means, but maybe we'll let that one linger. But do you have any other thoughts?
I don't think so. I think that is a good place to park it. I think there is one thing that you, me, and the government could agree on.
What's that?
That this is a fun one.
Ah, this was a fun one. All right. Well, folks, take it, use it, live. Thanks for joining, and have a good night.
Take care. Have a good week.